Hello and welcome. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razan Pereira. Saudi Arabia said on Monday that 2 Saudi oil tankers were among vessels targeted in a sabotage attack off the coast of the United Arab Emirates, condemning it as an attempt to undermine the security of global crude supplies. The UAE said on Sunday that 4 commercial vessels were sabotaged near its Fujairah Emirate, one of the world's largest bunkering hubs, lying just outside the Strait of Hormuz. It did not say who was behind the operation, which took place amid heightened tensions between the United States and Iran. Iran's foreign ministry called the incidents worrisome and dreadful and asked for an investigation. The Strait of Hormuz, a vital shipping route linking Middle East oil producers to markets in Asia, Europe, North America and beyond, has been at the heart of regional tensions for decades now. After the latest tensions between Washington and Tehran, Iran has threatened to close the oil artery. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the importance of the Strait of Hormuz. Joining me on the program today are Prabhu Dayal, former ambassador, Wail Awad, West Asia expert, and Ajay Dua, former Secretary, Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you. Let's first try and put into perspective and understand what the Strait of Hormuz is and who are all the stakeholders in the region.
Well, the Strait of Hormuz is a very narrow stretch of water between Iran on the north and Oman and the UAE in the south. And at its minimum stretch, it is only about 21 nautical miles or about 39 kilometers. Now, by its very nature, it poses certain problems because both Iran and UAE consider the extent of their territorial sea to be 12 nautical miles or some 22 kilometers. So in other words, the territorial sea claimed by both Iran and by Oman extend into each other's concepts. So there is a conflict per se. Complicating is the fact that while till the 20th century first half, only 3 nautical miles were considered as the territorial sea, but the UN Conference on the Law of the Sea extended it in 1982 to 12 nautical miles. But this was not accepted by the United States. The United States is not a signatory to the UNCLOAS, which again poses certain problems in the context of the Strait of Hormuz. So we have a situation where Iran has signed the UN Convention but not ratified it. Oman has signed and ratified it, and the United States has neither signed nor ratified it. So who governs the passage of ships? Under the UN Convention, the right of innocent passage is permitted. But Iran is very apprehensive of what the US ships would be up to and whether their passage would be innocent. So there have been periodic tensions and escalations posing almost a warlike situation. You know,
right.
the tensions have arisen and have grown to such an extent that the international community has been very worried because about 20% of the world's oil supplies pass through the Strait of Hormuz. And in fact, if you add the Qatari natural gas, the LNG, which also passes through the Strait of Hormuz, then this figure becomes even higher. And the oil supplies, as was mentioned in your introductory remarks, supply Europe, the Asian countries, and even the United States. Now, it is true that both Saudi Arabia and UAE have developed certain outlets for their crude, which do not require passage through the Strait of Hormuz. But nonetheless, still a very large volume of petroleum passes through the Strait of Hormuz, and anything which ends up closing the strait would have a devastating effect on the global economy, including India.
Sure.
And I'm sure that you would focus on this aspect.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in just a bit. But before that, Ms. Dua, I'd like to bring you into the picture. You know, so why is the strait important, and more importantly, what is its economic significance?
As Mr. Prabhudyal just mentioned, it is an extremely important water route, and it becomes even more important with respect to the kind of imports which countries like India make, which is hydrocarbon. About 80% of our requirement of crude oil and 50% of our requirement of gas comes from outside India and the Middle East. For almost every country in the Middle East, the water route is through the Strait of Hormuz. So it's an extremely important one, and with all right, there's some reduction in the importance of the Middle Eastern countries as a source of oil, with shale having been discovered, or shale, no, it's been discovered a long time ago, but its commercial extraction having resumed again. But again, I would say with the US now putting sanctions on import from another source, that is Venezuela, and now on Iran, the world is in need of oil, as always. We haven't quite developed a substitute source of energy. Renewable energies probably are gathering momentum, but so far, if we want to replace both fossil fuel, coal, as well as hydrocarbon, we are way out, and I don't think anybody is even talking about it in the near future. So the importance of the Strait of Hormuz as a water route, and oil has to necessarily come through the water route, not by air or by rail, because these areas are not connected by, say, a transatlantic, like Trans-European or a transatlantic train, so the importance of the water route itself is gets manifested.
Absolutely. Well, Awad, I'd like to bring you into the picture now. So, the ambassador raised it in his introductory remark about, the Saudi Arabia and others trying to find out alternate routes, really. How viable are they, first and foremost? Are there alternate routes? And secondly, of what strategic importance is the strait?
Well, I think with this, there is no alternative route. Maybe they tried Fujairah, but with the bombing of these ships in the territorial water of UAE, it's a clear indication also that there is no way of safety in that part of the world. Maybe it's an increased tension, and in West Asia, as we say, the turbulent water is rising because of the United States foreign policy toward Iran, which have created this kind of havoc and uncertainty, and the shadow or what we call the clouds of a war is imminent, though it may not be now. All this falls in the category of United States sanctions against Iran, where Iran said either we all export oil or nobody export oil. So alternative route to Hormuz is too early to speak about it, and our distinguished guests have already, both the guests have given you the exact pictures of the importance of Hormuz because of the world trade. And there is also worries on the international community that if it is closed, what could be the impact on the oil, and it will be severe for India, for China, for Korea, for Japan, so all these countries which depending on the oil. But keeping the tension rise will keep the petrol prices high. So there are other players like the United States which now trying to come in the pictures, like Russia, which wanted to export the oils into these countries. And as long as you keep the petrol prices high, then it will be viable for the United States to extract from the shales and export the oil. So this also makes it more sensible that more tension, more beneficiaries are known to us. Russia, on the other hand, is already under US sanctions. So therefore, they are non-OPEC exporters, but the rest of the OPEC countries are going to have a very strong impact on their export if something goes wrong with this. Having said that, I also say that there is a rising tension because of the United States have sent its bomber task forces, its B-52s. 4 of them are already stationed in the region. So it shows the amount or the level of tension is so high that any false flag can create a kind of a war. Though the United States has sent a good feeling through Iraq, through Pompeo, who went to Iraq and told the Iranian that we are not for a war, let's find the formula, saving formula out of this tension. But many people in the US administration feels that President Trump is also hijacked by his national security advisor, John Bolton, who is pushing for a war with Iran. And on the advice from whom? From the Israelis intelligence, who put for them that this is a place where we should have a war with Iran, bomb Iran. And he said it many times before that he wanted to bomb Iran because Iran is dangerous to the region, dangerous to the security of Israel, and also accusing Iran of playing havoc in the region and destabilizing the region, despite the fact that we know that it's the American and the Saudi-led coalitions that have created all this problem in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, in Sudan, in Libya, name it, and they are there.
Right.
So then where do we talk about Hormuz? Hormuz is important for the international community as much as it is important for the people of the region, that there should be a stability so the oil energy security can be secured for all the nations. So the more you have stability in the region, the better chances of not rising the prices where Indian economy or other economy can suffer. United States is not looking for a war in the region, by the way. The United States is looking for a way that their proxies, their own people on the ground, or Israelis can do or can drag the United States into a war in the region, and it will be all-out war. So therefore, there is a tension rising in the region.
Okay, tension is clearly rising, is what Wael Awad is suggesting, Ambassador. So, you know, like he mentioned in his opening remark as well, that, you know, the United States has indeed beefed up its presence in the region. There's talk of the Abraham Lincoln going there into the Strait of Hormuz as well. So, you know, what's likely to happen in the region? I mean, can war be ruled out? Is it too early to say? What's going to happen, do you think?
Well, you know, the USS Abraham Lincoln is already in the Red Sea, and the US has ordered another such aircraft carrier, I think the USS Arlington, to also join their forces in the Middle East. Now, clearly, as the previous speaker, Mr. White, mentioned, the US wants a regime change in Iran. And it is being egged on by Israel in that regard. The US has clearly said that it wants to bring Iran's oil exports to a zero level. Now, consider the fact that Iran's oil exports are 82% of their total exports. So, clearly, what the US wants to do is to bring the Iranian economy to its knees. Now, in retaliation, now the Iranians realize the sort of peril they are under, and the Iranian Revolutionary Guards commander has said that he would be attacking the interests of the US and its allies in the Persian Gulf area. Incidentally, Iran always refers to it as the Persian Gulf and never agrees to call it the Gulf, simply because it regards it as part of its area of influence. Now, can the Iranians do it? Well, according to experts, the Iranians can mine the Persian Gulf area, or a large part of it, within a matter of hours. Moreover, they have this tactic of using swarm boats, you know, small boats equipped with small missiles and spread out like a swarm in the Persian Gulf region. Now, anticipating such a possibility, both Saudi Arabia and UAE had already developed alternate routes for exporting their oil. UAE in Fujairah and Saudi Arabia through the Red Sea. The Strait of Hormuz will retain its great importance as regards the trading of petroleum products.
Right.
And the fact that we are so dependent on petroleum supplies from that part of the world, from all the countries which comprise the Gulf region, the Persian Gulf region. Therefore, we have reasons to be seriously concerned about the developments, and as the previous speaker said, the clouds of war which are looming there. I said I've seen tensions rise, but this time it seems more ominous because of the determination of President Trump and John Bolton to bring Iran to its knees, and because of the fact that the Iranians are very resilient people. You know, they are a country which has stood the test of time and has stood vicissitudes, and they are a very proud people, and they will not come down to their knees in this manner. They will fight. So therefore, the signs are very ominous at this particular time.
Right. So that having been said, Mr. Dua, is it an all-out oil war. I say this because you know what's happening in Venezuela, what's happening here in Iran, what's happening in the region as a whole, and also let's not forget what happened in the previous decade with the Saddam Hussein regime and Iraq. So is this an all-out oil war to ensure that the interests of the Americans are kept up?
Not yet, though it might be building up towards one. The reason being, one, as you said, there's an alternate source, that's the US itself. But more important, I think the world has started passing through a bit of a recession. The demand for oil, for instance, in China has come down. China has been a big guzzler of hydrocarbons with its own economy in trouble, and the demand for oil within the US itself, if this Sino-US trade conflict continues, US is also going to be feeling its supply chain is going to get disrupted no end by its imposing duties on stuff coming from China. China is then going to be choosy on what it's going to be exporting, what hurts President Trump, US, and then President Trump personally. Those would be the kind of priorities in terms of his constituencies in the US, etc. Having said that, let me say the situation today is one where the wisdom of the world has to prevail upon the so-called the only superpower in the country. If the US thinks that because of the NATO, where attack upon one or is an attack upon everybody else, is that kind of theory is going to work, I'm afraid it may not happen this time. The US has unilaterally withdrawn from the agreement which was reached in by President Trump's predecessor. Whether, and I'm going into a bit granular, if there has been a violation of that treaty, of that agreement between Iran and the rest of the world, who is the one to do the ground inspection and report? International Atomic Energy, agency in Vienna. They are the authorized UN body, because it was the UN sanctions which had been imposed earlier and they've been lifted, not the United States. It might be getting egged on by somebody from outside, somebody from within the cabinet, but the international community is not totally convinced, including the European allies of the US, that that's the best way forward. For instance, now, if the US is going to be imposing sanctions, banking sanctions and other kind of sanctions upon any country which trades with the US, it is going to lead to a whole lot of economic issues, particularly with respect to international stability of the international currency. How long can dollar remain then the only currency in which the trade can be done? Why not now alternatives coming up, including from China? China and the US, I don't think they can afford to ignore one another.
Right.
One might be the superpower, but the other has a fair amount of leverage in the world markets. Right. So I would think that please go up to an extent which you can back up.
Sure.
But if you're going to be going the way, all right, you like to send you have extra fuel, you want to burn it, send your US, the fleet to go roam around and police the seas. But if they are going to be used as a threat to the stability of that area, I think the international community would have a lot to talk about and a lot to work upon the US about.
All right. Talking about the Strait of Hormuz now, Wailawad, what are the Iranians' options? Because Iranians have been talking about closing the Strait of Hormuz. Is that really an option? Can they do it? This is an issue that has come up time and again over the years. And like the ambassador mentioned, it looks quite serious this time around. But can the Iranians close the Strait of Hormuz?
I don't think the Iranians are not wise otherwise. They are very wise people not to go into that extreme steps. But because of two reasons. A, that the United States is the only unilaterally have pulled out from this deal, which has already been said. The second part, the European differences with the United States is very much high, and they already opposed to the American pullout, and they call upon Iran not to pull out of the nuclear deal and continue to serve. So Iran is, as their foreign minister said, the strategic patients are there strategically, or patients strategically, they are still thinking and taking time to respond to the United States pulling out of the deal, where the European yet to take any steps which support the Iranian position on the region. So there is no question of closing Hormuz at this stage at all. You see the difference, the biggest problem which we are missing the point here. United States is worried not because of the Iranian nuclear deal. The United States have a long list for the Iranian. You have to, first of all and foremost, you have to price your oil and gas in US dollars. So from petrodollars to gas dollars, where the American wanted the dominance of dollars in the global trade, which is not possible because many countries start pulling out. Venezuela is paying the price. China is now dealing with Russia. Iran is also done. Iraq paid the price. Libya paid the price. So the United States is trying to tell to the world, I am the policeman. I am the unipolar in this world. I can impose what I want. But also we have to remember that the American influence in those regions is also receding. So therefore, you cannot put by force yourself to impose on the other country's sovereignty. So therefore, there is an issue here. The second part of the problem is Hormuz is an international water, and Iran will not go until the US stopped its ship. If Netanyahu is threatening to stop the Iranian oil ship from shipping, I don't understand why we see all the American provocations and the Israeli provocation are justified, and when the Iranian take steps to prevent and protect its own territories, we look at it as if it is the one who is causing the trouble. Who is calling the shot in the region? Why this tension? If the United States President saying that I have extracted $450 billion from Saudi Arabia to protect the monarchy in Saudi Arabia, and he said if I pull tomorrow, there will be no, you will not be able to stay for a week. So the American are definitely having a policy of looting nations, which they have started in Iraq, and a false flag. They unilaterally went and invaded Iraq. The similar, now we are seeing the similar scenario toward Iran. But the American people do not want the war with the Iranian, right, because everybody understands. But the proxies can do anything damage, sure, and that can drag into war. So Hormuz is very important, as Mr. Dua said. We need to, the international community has to take a strong and stern measures to prevent any escalation of the tension there.
Okay, quick closing comments from all my guests now. I've got about 3 minutes left on the program, starting first with the Ambassador. The implications for India.
Well, first of all, the international community has tried to soften the Americans on this, including we ourselves, but President Trump and his administration has not listened. What the implications for India could be perhaps very serious, because our oil imports from Iran will be affected, and therefore there would be consequences for our economy. The Trump administration has always had a list of grievances, as the previous speaker said, against Iran, but this time it is also extremely unhappy with the role that Iran played in the American defeat in Syria. The Americans have had to withdraw, and the role which the Iranians played is very well known. So that factor has added to the list of American grievances against Iran. There is also a war, a proxy war going on between the Iranians and the Saudis. In fact, it's a hot conflict, and there the Americans have sided with the Saudis. So that factor also has affected American perceptions of Iran. So overall, the escalation of tension around the Strait of Hormuz will affect the peace and stability of the region, and at the same time it will have an impact on the world economy, including the economy of individual countries like we ourselves.
Sure.
So I think if we can do anything to de-escalate tensions, we should try to do that. Of course, whether the Americans listen to anybody or not is a matter of open question.
You know, Mr. Dua, if there's a further escalation of tensions really in the region, and more specifically in the Strait of Hormuz, what does it mean for oil prices across the world?
Those would certainly soar up. Let there be no doubt about it. There is no substitute as of now for the Gulf oil. Call it the Persian Gulf or that entire region. They are crucial to the stability of the supplies from there, are critical for maintaining the world pricing of oil. Luckily, the even though the sanctions have come into force from the 2nd of May, the prices are still stable because one, there is some inventory. People have built up the stocks in anticipation. The 8 countries upon whom the sanctions have been imposed, the waiver has been withdrawn, and also because of a slowing down of the world economy. But having said that, let me say India, the question which you had asked Prabhu earlier, India as of now is also passing through a slowdown. Our oil consumption probably hasn't soared, which it usually does. There is a seasonal factor if you will analyze that. That hasn't happened during the summer so far. But that's because, one, we had built up our stocks. Second, the 57% reduction in imports from Iran, which we have effected in the last 3 weeks compared to, say, last year, has been made good by Saudi Arabia and UAE.
Right.
They have stepped up their supplies, and the US has offered to sell us more. But real substitute for Iran, there is something called a complexity factor in the oil industry, which means the particular kind of oil can be only refined by particular refineries.
Right.
New refineries are now able to have higher complexity. The older ones are still tuned to Iranian oil.
Absolutely.
Second, Iran was giving us terms of settlement which were in petrodollars rather than in terms of US dollars. We were getting 60 days credit.
Right.
And then the insurance was free. Iran was paying for it. So we are going to be incurring costs on these,
Right.
including in our capital works on our refineries,
Sure.
etc. As of now, we're surviving, but for factors altogether some different.
Right. All right. Wailawat, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Well, I think there is no question of a limited war in the region. If the war could break out, God forbidden, then we are having an all-out war, which means India is the major stakeholder in the region. India will suffer the most, not only because of the oil energy security, it's also because the large Indian expats, which is more than 7 million people, are in the Gulf state. So India has to take a very proactive step to make sure that there is no war break out in this region, and should tell the United States and the players in the region that this is a big issue. So therefore, we have to play it very safe in this. But as I said, nobody is guaranteed. Once you start a war, you cannot guarantee who can stop it. So therefore, there will be effect, of course, on the gas and the oil and all the export, not only because alternative route, or could be anybody export will be a target within that region. So therefore, it's going to be a mess in that part of the world. And I don't think I wanted to see this part of this war in any near future.
All right. Tensions are escalating really as far as the Strait of Hormuz are concerned, but the panelists here suggesting that we do not want to see skirmishes or war in the region because it can have cascading and far-reaching effects and implications across and around the world. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.